أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسول كريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. We have been reflecting on two of the divine names in this gate of justice and wisdom. So just to remind ourselves, so this is the treatise of resurrection, the Risale-i Hajj, or the treatise of resurrection, the 10th word. And the 10th word is a long treatise, a long chapter. And this is actually towards the end, the main focus after the chapter takes you through all the analogies and different examples in nature, in the book of creation. Remember, we are talking about the Kitab al-Kainat, the book of creation, that Allah expresses himself, his quality through this divine book that people call nature. But as Muslims, we know from the Quran, Allah's revelation, that this nature or this universe is a self-expression of Allah's names. So Allah is not incarnate in the creation. Allah is not fully, his full divinity is not expressed in the creation, but we understand him through his qualities. And those qualities are displayed throughout the book of the universe and wait for us to be read and unlocked and unveiled. So there's this huge library in front of us, and we realize that each and every being is actually not just a book, but or not just a letter, as I previously said, but each being is an encyclopedia, basically. And so we are standing in front of this huge, vast library, and we are trying to read and read and read. And as we read, we grow and we are enlightened and illumined. Reading and growing and learning, these are existential things in our nature. The moment we are born, we are learning, we are growing. We are taught by our parents about names. In fact, then we learn about our own name. And knowing the names of things teaches you the reality of things, their qualities, how to control them, how to direct them, how to manipulate them, right? So knowing and naming things, the moment we are born, we are learning not just the ABC, but the reality around us. We are very self-aware, and we are constantly growing in knowledge. In fact, this is a never-ending enterprise. So this is the human journey, the human journey of growth and learning and knowing. But in Islam, the sacred knowledge is anchored in encountering the universe, reading the universe, and reading quite literally in the name of Allah, reading the universe in the name of Allah. And scholars have reflected, what does it mean to read in the name of Allah? That we're not looking at just a thing for the thing itself, but for its significance, because every being is a sign from Allah and it has significance. It tells us endless things about Allah. So that is what we are trying to do. We try to gain knowledge about who Allah is through the book of the universe. And in this treatise, we've arrived at the gates of justice and wisdom. And when we look at justice and wisdom, two of the names of Allah that are mentioned in the Quran, Al-Adl and Al-Hakim. And justice is a very big word, a big concept. We always think in macro terms. But here we see that justice is in every little creation. And every little minute creature is not just a little creature. But like I said, even a cell, an atom, is an endless encyclopedia. And we see in every being Allah's justice, Allah's knowledge, Allah's wisdom displayed. This is simply how what we experience as self-evident. There's no question that deep order is present, that a plan, a planner, a designer, that wisdom is involved, that measuring is involved. Everything is too fine-tuned to just explain it with randomness or coincidence or through causes that are deaf and blind. So I want to reflect on microjustice today a little bit because, like I said, justice seems always such a macro and big concept, as if justice has to be implemented by governments, institutions, by leaders. Whereas justice, as Allah tells us through the creation, is present in every little creature. And that, I think, calls us to also implement justice in our own micro circles. And so I'll finish this section and I will talk more about what micro justice looks like and how micro justice, implementing micro justice, leads us to establishing macro justice. Because oftentimes you want to start big in the macro world, outside world, but in fact, the most immediate impact we have and the most sustained impact in terms of establishing justice, we will only achieve when we focus on the micro circles, being fully present wherever we are and investing ourselves fully in our micro circles. And those micro circles, I've already noted, are these micro communities that we've talked about. Our bodies, first of all, is a micro community. All the human body is a micro community that needs to be taken care of. And then we talked about the other social circles. So being aware that this body has inward and outward members and that I need to treat them justly, that I need to give every inward and outward organ and body part, every emotion, proper attention, proper care, proper love, establishes then justice and then leads to a holistic and peaceful lifestyle. That's why when I'm out of order, if I'm not at peace with myself, and I'm not putting things in order in my micro world, my body, my life, my emotions, my mind, my heart, my sense of hearing, my sense of seeing, speaking, feeling, inward, outward. These are the external and internal body parts and that are part of this micro community. If I don't do justice to them, then I have committed oppression and harm to myself. That's the first aspect of establishing micro justice. When Allah talks about justice in the Quran, He often talks about that we have harmed ourselves. We do not harm Allah. And Allah says multiple times in the Quran, "O those of my believers who have transgressed against themselves." Every time when we do something or act in opposition to Allah's revelation, we fundamentally transgress against ourselves. We oppress our nafs, ourselves. We harm ourselves. That needs to sit. And then there is, of course, no surprise that all these internal feelings and emotions and faculties and potential and there are endless emotions, right? I'm reading books about emotion. Experts say there are more than 100 emotions and they're not clear about the categories either. But if you look into your internal world, curiosity, love, anger, jealousy, hatred, sadness, grief, frustration, whatever, so many emotions. And as you enter into different roles, you also and inhabit different personalities. Like when you enter motherhood or parenthood, other emotions kick in that Allah then puts into place. So we are an endless universe. simply because we are a microcosmos. And when we do not establish justice and order and are acting with wisdom towards our own micro community, which is the body, then we also cannot be fully present in those other circles. That's why the focus primarily uh, in the Quran and here, of course, the core is yourself. You need to be fully knowing who you are, healthy self-awareness, healthy self-care. That's a huge word in our times now. But this is what ultimate self-compassion looks like. Self-compassion is to know that I'm not the owner of this body, that I cannot claim ultimate ownership, and I'm called to treat all these members with justice and wisdom. Otherwise, I harm myself, and all these body parts and emotions will bear witness against me on the day of judgment. This is the whole point here. It's talking about the day of resurrection, the supreme tribunal, where all our, what we call it, the seven gates of the heart will speak out and say, if we abuse them, misused them, exploited them. And then, of course, if those emotions and body parts are not treated justly, then they will also act unjustly in those other circles. So if I'm not aware that my eyes are a sacred trust from Allah, or if I neglect that fact, then I do harm with my eyes to others, right? Or I watch indecent things or improper things or all of that. So you see how then the lack of establishing micro-justice in my own body then feeds into transgression into the other circles. If I do not sleep properly or sufficiently, which sadly a lot of people neglect proper sleep, right? What's the sunnah of sleeping even? And that triggers then fatigue and nausea and low temperedness, and then maybe feeds into treating or results into the bad treatment of other people in your life, in your family, because you need to have a healthy understanding what triggers you. And some of these things are really important, like lack of sufficient sleep is a harm to yourself, which then results on to harm to others in your microcircles, such as your family, your children, or, so we see how all these circles are connected. And the reason why I'm saying is because this whole section focuses on justice, but we think always on macro terms, justice, but we need to come back to the micro justice, which is established first here, making sure that all our senses are aligned in harmony, acting properly, thriving for one cause and for one creator. And when we have him as our purpose and our focal point, then we have truly established micro justice. I'd like to finish it up here, and then inshallah we'll talk some more about micro justice. And we all embody that, right? A lot of our lives are fashioned in a way that Allah has destined. We have no influence on these things. And I'll talk some more about this. So he talks about these two qualities of Allah that are displayed throughout the creation, Al-Adl and Al-Hakim. Do you wish for proof that all things are done with justice and balance? The fact that all things are endowed with being, given shape, and put in the appropriate place in accordance with precise equilibrium and in appropriate measure shows that all matters are done in accordance with infinite justice and balance. Similarly, the fact that all things are given their rights in accordance with their disposition, that they receive all the necessities of their being and all the requirements of life in the most fitting form, this too is the sign left by a hand of infinite justice. Again, the fact that answer is always given to every petition and request made by the tongue of disposition. In the original, it's lisanul hal. So we see that through this language of disposition and of natural need or necessity, this demonstrates the existence of infinite justice and wisdom. So we know that our stomachs have needs, or our eyes have needs, and we see that Allah answers to our needs according to our tongue of disposition. So whatever we need as human being, it's there in this world. Allah has provided sufficiently for everyone, and there is no lack of anything. Now, is it at all possible that the justice and wisdom that hasten to relieve the pettiest need of the smallest of creation should fail to provide immortality, the greatest need of man, the greatest of creatures, that it should fail to respond to his greatest plea and cry for assistance, or that it should not preserve the dignity of God's dominicality by preserving the rights of his servants? Man, whose life is so brief, cannot experience the true essence of justice in this transient world. It is for this reason that matters are postponed for a supreme tribunal. For true justice requires that man, this apparently petty creature, should be rewarded and punished, not in accordance with his pettiness, but in accordance with the magnitude of his crime, the importance of his nature, and the greatness of his function. Could you please turn off your microphones? I'm hearing some background noise, please. Since this passing and transient world is far from manifesting such wisdom and justice for man, who is created for eternity, of necessity there will be an eternal hell and everlasting paradise of that just and awesome possessor of beauty, that wise and beauteous possessor of all. So it's basically reiterating the points that I already mentioned, but we see that for everything is given their sustenance in according to their needs. And there's no questioning in that. Every being, you see, when it's winter in the cold season, the birds are dressed, or the animals are dressed in a way that makes them survive and sustain throughout the cold season. And then certain animals magically receive the proper dress for the cold season. Or when we see animals living in cold geographic areas, that they are given the perfect dress to survive in that, harsh environment. So this shows us that justice is at place. Justice means to put everything in its proper place, to answer to the needs in its proper way. And we see that also in our lives. The moment we enter this world, we are provided with the best nourishment, uniquely fashioned for us, personalized milk that has been provided by our Creator for our needs. And so human beings are not able to do that. Right? Those examples come up all the time throughout the Risale-i. And when we see that Allah gives to every tiny being their answers to every being according to their needs, then this also calls us to answer to all the things that we are connected, that we also need to establish justice in all the circles that we are connected with. So that brings me to the point of micro-justice. We are all born into a certain context, right? We are all born in a certain way that we had no influence. I always say, I am the daughter of Kurdish Muslim immigrants who came to Germany. I was born as the daughter of Kurdish Muslim immigrants from Turkey, and I was raised in Germany. So that's one sentence. But a lot of these contexts, I had no influence, right? I was born as a woman, and I already experienced injustice just by being born as a woman. How so? And this can be inside and outside my community, right? Being born as a girl or as a woman into this world already carries injustices. And for example, I'm a first generation college student in my family, coming from the very eastern part of Turkey. My parents moved to Germany because of economic poverty. It was an involuntary move. And so none of my family members ever went to university or school. I'm the first who went to school. My mother doesn't know how to read or write. And I'm very proud of my simple upbringing. I'm very proud. I'm not saying this as to demean simple background. But what it also says, that when you're born in a certain context, that Allah makes you aware of certain injustices. You become aware that some things are not right. So when I was born as a girl already and went to school for the first time in my family, my whole Kurdish family, there was already some resistance. And this was in the 1980s, where even Muslims would say, why do you send your daughter to school? What's the point? They are going to get married off anyway, and there's no point of educating a Muslim girl or a girl because they are going to stay at home. Now, is this something that our religion or tradition teaches? Of course not. But that ignorance is there. It's a lack of understanding, a lack of our religious resources, the understanding that education is an obligation on men and women is rooted, anchored in our tradition. But when you're born into certain circumstances, you're already facing a certain injustice and you become self aware that you realize this is not right. This is not right, especially when you become an educated person and you realize you engage with your resources. So that is what I call embodied injustice. You're already born into a circumstance. Allah has given or regards every human being as morally and spiritually equal and calls both men and women to um, be knowledgeable. That is an obligation, a sacred obligation. It's not a non-negotiable because ignorant people are dangerous, and it's important in our Islamic tradition, in any tradition, that human beings are educated enough about their religion so they can navigate the world and life. So, an education and knowledge is an obligation, sacred obligation in our tradition. But along the way, things somehow, you know, were dismissed, neglected, or people didn't emphasize it as much. But when you're born into that context, so now you're embodying injustice and you're realizing there's a lot of resistance for you to come to pursue knowledge. What do you do with that? Now you realize then Allah calls you to establish justice, right? So you're embodied injustice, now becoming self-aware, realizing as a daughter, as a girl, as a woman, and this is not something, of course, a monopoly to the Muslim community. There are still many women and girls around the world in every community who are being neglected or disadvantaged or excluded or discriminated. We all know that. We are very well aware. And this was also the situation in when Islam emerged, right? Female infanticide was very common. That a woman or a girl was seen as a dishonor or a shame for a family. This is very common in cultures across the world, sadly. But what does the Quran say, how it calls us to establish justice? When we are committing a crime against a human being, we are actually committing a crime against God, because it's basically uh, an injustice to Allah's justice. And not honoring a human being the way they are created is dishonoring Him. And so we see, for example, how Allah calls us in the Quran to establish justice and to honor His creation and to refrain from harming any human being, man or woman, it doesn't matter. But this is the reality. So you already come into this world and you embody injustice. But what do you do when you're aware of this wound and the scar and the harm that has been done to you? You try to come back to this wisdom. If Allah established justice in every little being, then I'm called, when I am self-aware of injustice, to bring back Allah's voice and bring back Allah's justice and say, this has been forgotten, or this has been neglected, or this has been dismissed. And I'm called to revive that. I'm called to bring that back. And so when we each do that, we are bringing back Allah's justice and Allah's name al-adl. So that's one identity, right? Our gender. Like being a woman or a girl already comes with a set of disadvantages. And there's no denying that the most vulnerable human being on this planet is a baby girl. When you are born as a baby girl, you're already faced with a lot of disadvantages, right? And this is not to feed into some type of agenda fights here, but this is the reality that is also acknowledged. But when we are in these micro circles, I'm in this body, in this female body. Now I'm called to establish, bring back justice. How do I do it? Trying to overcome the resistance, trying to overcome through education, through empowering others, through trying to eradicate ignorance and helping people understand that our religious tradition teaches the pursuit of sacred knowledge, that we each need to know the importance of our religion, and that education is not a threat. It's enrichment for a woman's life so that she can navigate and educate the next generations too, and her society and community. So that's one. But in that sentence, every time, and I was invited to talk about justice, and I took it this way. I just read the sentence. I said, I'm the daughter of Kurdish Muslim immigrants. And already in that sentence, there is a lot of injustices that we each face. We all come with certain identifiers into this world, right? So already being an immigrant, you experience xenophobia, right? The dehumanizing discourse on immigrants, that immigrants or refugees are a burden to society, are a problem to society. So growing up in Germany, that was also a reality, or even here, right? That most of us who, or even in Muslim countries, like immigrants and refugees cannot, there are even their issues, right? To say, I'm the one who was here first and the other who came is a problem. And this is something that Allah calls us to challenge, because this is not just. We all know that we are all migrants and immigrants in this world. We are all travelers and strangers in this world. That's a prophetic wisdom. None of us is settled and should not be settled. All of us are called to share resources. All of us are shared to call, are called to share uh, the blessings that Allah has bestowed on us. None of us should fear poverty when we share. These are the things that are Quranic in establishing justice and wisdom. So when you say immigrant or refugee, so you're already embodying that injustice too, because you will face as an immigrant or refugee certain disadvantages. You'll be discriminated, you'll be excluded, you will not be tolerated. And this is not to paint a negative view, but I'm saying when you are embodying micro injustices, how do you turn them into justice? Because now Allah has made you aware of a certain injustice, and you are called now to bring back Allah's divine voice of justice by allowing you to experience certain injustices. Allah makes you aware of His name, the just. And so to channel this in constructive ways, to say, yes, I'm a woman. Yes, I'm an immigrant. Yes, I might be a refugee. Yes, I'm experiencing some injustice, some exclusion, some discrimination. But how can I make this experience an empowering one, a healing one for others? And how can I bring back Allah's name, Al-Adl, and just? This is, I think, fundamentally how we come to self-awareness and awareness of Allah. Now you realize, oh, I really need Allah's name, Al-Adl. He is the just, and He is an injustice. And I'm aware that this is unjust. And we all experience different injustices, whether it's gender injustice or xenophobia, religious discrimination. I can write a whole story about religious discrimination, how my Muslim identity is perceived as a problem, as an issue, as a threat, as a news, as a burden. So we are all in different spaces, and when we experience that injustice, how do we bring back Allah's justice? This is what I'm thinking of when I think of micro-justice, because when you experience it in your own body, you know what it feels like embodying injustice, but how do I turn it into justice? So I took it constructively. I said, I don't want other children to have the same experience like I had, and to take it constructively, empower them, educate them, guide them, uh, cultivate optimism in them, make them see as constructive and contributing members of the societies they are in, right? Ethnic nationalism or ethnic discrimination is also reality. And injustice is not perpetrated by one group, right? Allah says to us in the Quran that we need to establish justice even if it is against ourselves, our family, or our community. It's not always black and white. I might be also perpetrating injustice, walking throughout the neighborhood, maybe seeing a black man and feeling, oh, am I now in danger because I'm influenced by a certain narrative that teaches me that a black man might be a danger to my life, and this is an unjust version, of course. But to be aware, to say, wait a minute, that is a stereotype. That is something that I have fallen prey, and I need to be aware to not judge people, to always meet them on neutral ground and uh, be just to them, right? And so the idea of the Muslim terrorist or extremist who perpetrates crimes or atrocities, we carry that too, right? Like every time when you come into a space and people see you as a Muslim, they might think that way or might feel that way. But how do you make them see the true version of yourself, and how do you allow them to meet you on neutral ground without assigning you certain negative traits? So these are the examples of embodied injustice that I'm carrying, and I'm sure many others carry with themselves. It could be gender discrimination, religious discrimination, xenophobia, Islamophobia. All these are injustices. And when we are living through them, Allah makes us see what it looks like uh, to experience injustice. But then the idea is not just to sit and complain, but to be called to actively bring back Allah's name, the just, to put things into the right place. And so we have all an understanding of what is the supreme good. Allah has created us with this fitrah to know what feels just, to know what is good. And when we experience certain injustices, we tap into that fitrah and that knowledge, that inner knowledge that Allah has created us with. And we know this is deeply unjust. But what do I do now? How do I think? How do I speak? How do I change? How do I bring back Allah's justice into my micro circles? Again, micro justice is starting with where you are and then looking at, is there injustice in, am I being just to my body? Am I being just to my micro community? Am I being just to my family, my relatives, my neighborhood, my workplace, and my community, and to the creation? Those are these concentric circles where Allah calls us to establish micro justice. So, for example, if I waste water, right, that's fundamentally an unjust behavior. I mean, on the surface, I haven't done anything, but it is a waste, right? Wasting water is harmful, but it's not just harmful for me, but harmful for the creation. So the micro injustice that I'm inflicting also has impact on the macrocosmos. What I'm eating, what I'm consuming, and how I live my life in my micro circle also has an impact onto the other circles, right? So modeling a just life will be witnessed by my children, and they copying and emulating or being their role model. They take on certain things, right? And they imitate and then apply it to their own lives. So being fully aware where we experience injustices and where we perpetrate justice, where we perpetrate injustices, we are not just experiencing injustice, we sometimes also commit injustice. May Allah protect us. And that's why we need to constantly seek refuge in Allah, always asking Allah to guide us and be agents of justice and peace and compassion and wisdom. But fundamentally, when we understand how Allah has established justice in the book of creation, every little thing, every little creature is put into its proper place. Its needs are properly answered. And that's where then the action piece comes for us. Am I responding properly to the needs of people around me? Am I responding appropriately to the needs of my own self? Am I responding properly to the needs of my community, to my family? All of these are then efforts of bringing back micro justice, which then also, of course, impact the macro world. So this is why everything starts by having that healthy self-awareness and also knowing where was injustice done to me and how do I turn the pain into healing and how do I turn the darkness into light for others and how do I make it a constructive experience. And so I want to take back this big concept of justice that sometimes we think is deferred to the leaders and say, I'm the one who implements justice. I'm the one who has experienced also at times injustice. But do I become a victim or am I an agent in bringing back Allah's justice? And we are learning this from the creation. All what is said here, what I'm taking from here is Allah has established justice in the creation and wants me to maintain it, but also calls me to implement it into my own life in every tiny aspect of my being, whether it's feeling, thinking, acting, in my relationships. And that's why this name or the quality of Al-Adl is something that we are growing into and cultivating constantly. Always seeking Allah's forgiveness, always seeking Allah's guidance, that we are truly living into this name. Because along the way, we do fall, we do make mistakes. And like I said, sometimes we are the ones who can transgress and oppress. May Allah protect us. But then we have these mechanisms to come back, like istighfar and repentance and forgiveness. And then, but fundamentally, all this human journey is to become God conscious. The greatest consciousness is when we then realize Allah is truly the absolute just. Because whatever I am doing, I realize it's always deficient compared to His justice. And whatever we are experiencing in this world, we will never experience absolute justice. And that's why I believe in a supreme tribunal. What is my greatest injustice that I'm embodying now? The loss of my daughter. It hurt so bad. It's the greatest pain, but there's nothing that can bring her back. No justice in this world. But it's in this human knowing, right? And the Nafs says, you didn't deserve this. What did I do? Right? I was always abiding by the rules. I was always following the guidelines. I was always a law-abiding citizen. I never harmed anyone. Why am I experiencing this quote-unquote injustice? But then Allah makes you realize when you are at the graveside of your child that you know this is wrong. It's a human knowing that knows that there is supreme good, and that's Allah. Only He can bring back goodness. Only He can bring back justice. So all this might feel cruel. All the things that we encounter might feel unjust and not deserving. But this is where we then, by what's mentioned here, surrender to Allah's wisdom, devote ourselves to His wisdom, and trust that He has our best interests at heart. But shaitan and the nafs can sometimes say, what did you do to deserve this? What have you done? You haven't done anything wrong. And so then we need to understand that nothing is outside Allah's justice and wisdom, that everything is in its proper place. It's just our narrow minds and eyesights that cannot see, but it's iman and the belief and the certainty in this afterlife that is talked about here constantly that gives us conviction that Allah's justice will be restored, absolute justice, because there are some things in this world that cannot be restored. Like it said here, a lot of people, their life is so short, they cannot experience the true essence of justice in this transient world. So much suffering, so much pain. But can there ever be justice to like alleviate that pain? And so your heart and your fitrah, that's the argument of the supreme good. How do we know? How do we know this is wrong? Why does everyone feel that this is wrong when something unjust or evil happens? Because we have been programmed that way. We have been created that way. That Allah points to us that He is the supreme good, that He is the supreme just, and that there will be a day of resurrection where everything will be rectified. All the injustices will be uh, taken into account, and then Allah's absolute justice will take place. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.